Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today we are going to be talking about variable ISO on Superfilm Support. Do remember you can send me an email to superfilmsupport.com and I'll answer you on a video here on YouTube. So today's question is about Karen, and he's asking me when shooting with some films, and he puts, for example, XP2, can you do variable ISO on the same roll without modify your developing time? Could I please explain? So I'm going to go through two different scenarios, basically. There's black and white and there's color negative. I'm not going to do slides because slides are extremely special with exposure. So no, you can't do variable ISO with slides. They basically are properly exposed or they'll look terrible. That's basically how it goes with slides. So black and white, first of all. Black and white, there's a thing that happens with black and white is you can have your nominal ISO, which imagine is HP5 is 400, says Ilford, or FP4 is 125, or Fomapan is 400 or 100 or 200, and that's what the manufacturer says. And you set your camera at that ISO that they recommend. You shoot it all at the roll. Should be fine if you develop it with the normal times they tell you, etc., etc. Then you can always push it, which means you give it less light, so you develop it for longer, or you can pull it, which means you give it more light and then you develop it a little shorter or even at the normal times, because sometimes the film speeds are not really true to what the manufacturer says. But what happens is sometimes in black and white film, you can do what would be variable ISO. And I air quote that because what you do is you can shoot a roll, I don't know, HP5 at ISO 100 and then change it to ISO 400 and then maybe change it to ISO 250 and so on. Honestly, that's kind of like cheating yourself because you're basically going to just develop it with the same time. But what you can do with black and white is what they call stand development, which is instead of developing the normal agitations in like whatever 5-6 minutes, depending on your developer, and doing it 20 degrees, you do stand development, which means you use a very small amount of concentrated chemical and then you use a long period of time. So one of the ones that is very used is Rodinol at 1+100, which means 1 part of Rodinol plus 100 parts of water. So very small amount of chemistry. And then you do the whole tank and you do like, I think it's like 10 agitations, then you leave it sitting for half an hour. Then after half an hour, you do like a couple slow agitations and leave it. What happens here is the chemicals will develop certain areas faster and then kind of like die out and will work on other areas. So it kind of balances, it kind of like makes a very flat look to the film. It won't be super contrasty. So this will save mystery roll. So what I call mystery rolls are those that you load on a camera, you don't remember the ISO. I'm gonna just whoop it at like 100, and if I overexposed it, fine. If I underexposed it, then it should be okay with doing that stand development. So stand development will help you solve problems when you exposed all over the place. But usually you won't be able to do 1600 ISO, then ISO 50. So like there's a small margin you can move, but you can't just go nuts. Also, this is very widely used if you have an extreme amount of contrast in your shots and your scenes, and you're like, I want to kind of like tame the highlights, but like bring up the shadows and etc. Stand development can save you there. Then in color negative, and XP2 is a black and white color negative film. So what it means is it's basically the base is a color negative film, but it renders in black and white. So you develop in C41. With C41, you can push, you can pull, but you can't do stand development, at least as far as I know. And please, these Superfilm supports are for people also to give their input. If you know anything about stand developing in C41, I've never heard of it, but if you do, leave a comment below. I'm very interested and I'll pin it and maybe make a video on that topic only. But basically, color negative film is usually more forgiving to exposure changes. And what it means is it's very hard to get wrong. And especially you can't get wrong if you overexpose. So I'm going to leave a couple examples on the video description. One's going to be a video from McDougalls, who's made a couple of videos on film latitude and how much exposure testing of Portra, Ektar, and so on. And then I'm going to leave an article by the film lab Carmencita here in Spain, which talks about how exposure affects film. Color negative film, if you overexpose it, it looks sometimes better than at nominal ISO. So Portra 400 shot at 400 looks good, at 200 looks even better to some people. At 100 it still looks great, even at 50 it still looks great normal developing times. But if you underexpose color negative film, it starts becoming muddy and mushy very fast. So if you're needing to play with the ISOs or you have a lot of changing light, I would suggest going for a higher ISO like Portra 800 or Lomography 800 and shooting it at 800 all day. And if you need to expose it at 400 because there's too much light, you'll be fine because you're giving it more light, and color negative film usually does great with more light. So there's not such a thing as variable ISO, and this is something that Lomography announced with some of their films. They're like variable ISO Metropolis, and it's like, it's not really variable ISO. It's like if I sold a Kodak said Portra 400 is variable ISO. Yes, it is, because if you expose it at 100, 200, 400, and 800, you're going to get decent results either way. So it's not that it's variable, it's just very flexible in exposure, and the film can render with different light scenarios and exposed to different amounts of light. So that's basically what it goes with film and exposing. Those coming from digital photography or using digital photography, you know that you usually have to expose a little bit to the right. I think nowadays sensors are getting way better, so they're catched up. It used to be like shooting slides almost. If you would go anywhere, it would, like, your highlights would clip and that was gone. It was easier to bring the shadows up. In color negative film, usually you want to give it more light and it works amazing. So honestly, variable ISO is not such a thing. If you're shooting a lot of film and you are always changing scenes, it's almost easier to have a camera you can change the back, so you can have different ISO backs and maybe different film stocks. Or you can have multiple bodies. If you're using 35, you're using, I don't know, K1000, you can have one with Portra 400 and one with Tmax 3200 or similar, depending on what you're shooting. But yeah, that's basically super film support this week. I hope that helped or explained a little bit. As I said, I'm no expert in this matter. I've only done a limited test, but I have shot a lot of color negative film, overexposed a couple of stops, and it always looks great. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and see you in the next one. Bye.